How many of you remember the moment when you first fell in love? I didn't ask you to raise your hands. Your spouse is next to you. You don't have to prove it. Well, I remember. So I can see it in my mind's eye like it was last night. So I was a sophomore at the University of Iowa, and I started dating Lori our freshman year. But she was at Iowa State University, which was 122.4 miles away, door to door. But in those days, it was about a little over an hour and a half drive in my 76 brown LTD across the cornfields and the smell of pigs. So there was one night that fall, it was a Thursday, and I just had this feeling like I had to go see her. So I decided I was going to surprise her. I finished my classes that day. I hopped in my car, and I headed down Interstate 80. Now, the night before, I'd sort of casually asked her where she thought she would be. Remember in those days, no cell phones, no Facebook. So I sort of had to hope she'd be there. So I got to Ames. I walked into Granddaddy's, this huge bar, college drinking hole, lots of people, full on a Thursday night, smoky, loud country music. So I walked around about 10, 15 minutes around all these tables, and I'm thinking, crap, she's not here. But I forgot. There's one place she loved to be, the dance floor. So I glanced. There she was with this raggedy old cowboy hat on. I wormed my way through the audience, tapped her on the shoulder. She turned around. Oh, man. That look on her face, the smile, the eyes, the hug. Game over. I love to just tell that story. So, love is a two-way street. But for me, from that moment, I was not going to let go. And it wasn't just this feeling of like, I want to hang out with her for the rest of my life. It was truly this conviction of, I just can't not spend the rest of my days with her. Like, I just can't not be beside her. So, picture, that's a few weeks after we got married. And 30 years later, I am still by her side. My hair's not by her side, but I'm by her side. So what I want to talk to you today about is how to fall in love. Not like really. Not with a person, but with a purpose, with a cause in your life. Not romantically, but with passion and with feeling. I can't not do this. I don't have time to not make impact. I could not imagine not. It's not that I can do this, it's that I can't not. I do not remember the first time, but I hear these grammatically incorrect phrases verbatim, repeatedly, from educated people, from partners like all of you. When I ask somebody, do you want to be a part of big social change in your community? So what I do want to talk to you about today is what it is in your life that you can't not do. What is it in your life that you can't not do? So we've all heard of can-do people. Some people go beyond can-do. They make a decision at some point in their lives that there is something, some burning cause that they can't not do something about. Literacy, leadership development, youth violence, microfinance, the environment, on and on. There is this stickiness, a durability to why somebody says can't not do. It's because some cause has grabbed them and it will not let go. Just like Lori grabbed my heart that night at Granddaddy's and I could not let go. So for the last 16 years, I have had this insanely wonderful privilege of working side by side at this intersection between philanthropically minded people and social change agents. An incredibly unique vantage point. On the ground, real-time ups and downs. I think I've been to almost every SVP in North America. This year I added London, Beijing, Seoul, Tokyo. And then what I've done for the last year is try to step back a little bit and think about those 16 years and what do I think that I have learned. So what I want to have a conversation today about is about you as an individual. SVP is a network. We're part of a network. We're all about the network. But for right now, for today, I want to talk about you and me. And what I want to do is I want to raise your sights and change your sense of your own potential. And if there's one thing that I've learned, the most important question I really believe somebody can ask themselves is, what is it you can't not do? What is your can't not do? One great question is worth more than a dozen answers. The right question asks a person to think a problem through for themselves way more powerfully than giving them the answer ever could. So the first boss I had out of business school was this guy that just drove me nuts. I was this brand new employee, and I'd go in for answers, and all he would do is ask me questions. I would go with this brilliant plan from this 24-year-old to our latest strategic problem, and he'd ask me more questions. Like, how the hell did this guy ever get a job at this place in the first place? 10 years later, he was the CEO, and I had long since realized the power of the right question. So answering that question asks you to look inside yourself, but what really matters is what you do with the answer to take outside into the world to realize your potential to create the greatest impact. So don't get me wrong. I know that it takes more than just one question to create change. But I believe, I know, that the people that will dare to open their heart and authentically answer that question for themselves are the people that I truly believe will make big change in our future. So just so you know, it's already catching on. There's a new movie called The Good Lie. It's about the tragic story of lost boys and girls in the civil war in Sudan who become real-life orphans. So the very first time that she read the script, the actress Reese Witherspoon said her immediate reaction was, I can't not do this. She took the part on the spot. So it's catching on. All right. So you could say to yourself, finding your can't not do's always been a good thing. That's true. But I want to submit to you that it matters now more than it ever has. Far more. Why? All right, let me step back for just a minute and sort of put our work in a broader context. So in the world that we live in today, there's an idea, a concept called the force multiplier. It's not a complex. It basically means something that amplifies the impact of something or someone else. So here's a really simple example, a hammer. A hammer amplifies the impact of moving your arm. I would suggest, by the way, that you are sitting in a room of multipliers that can amplify your own social impact. So our world is increasingly impacted by these much less simple multipliers of technology, connectedness, and globalization. Each one of those has the potential to amplify the intensity of our social problems or accelerate the solutions to them. Each one of those three multipliers also means that any one person, each of you today, can have so much more impact than you ever could before, far more, if you know how to focus and amplify that impact. That's the game we're playing today. So let me give you a case in point. At one time, polio seemed insurmountable. In the late 70s, a handful of Rotarians got together and they started to decide, you know, polio is something we don't just sort of want to get rid of. We really can't not get rid of this. So over the next 20 years, they worked together with the UN and the World Health Organization, and they made some progress. By 1999, polio was still endemic in about 20 countries, still over 10,000 cases annually. 15 years later today, polio is now endemic in a handful of countries. There's a few hundred cases annually. And the end game, still very challenging, is within sight. So they've always had the medical solution. What changed is technology and globalization that made their end game so much more attainable. So what this world really needs is more people like that handful of Rotarians 35 years ago that will commit to the long term for that one cause that they just can't not make an impact on. Think about how much our world has changed in just the last 10 years. Our commerce, our social media, our lives have changed because of those three forces. Now think about the next 10 years and how much social change is possible because of those same three forces. And the difference maker, the catalyst that changes those multipliers into forces for good are can't not do people. People like each of you. People like Lisa Chen. So I first met Lisa Chen about 10 years ago when she joined SVP Seattle. She was one of these people that, my God, it took forever to get her to join. She had all these questions. Everything had to be right. How did this work? How did that work? Just write the damn check, Lisa. But she was also very thoughtful, smart, committed. At that time, she had had a successful 20-year career in the private sector. So a few months ago, I went over to her office and sat down with her to talk for a while. 19 and 20-year-olds streaming in and out of her office while we talked. She explained to me at that moment in time I was at a crossroads in my life. I was working at a large company. I didn't know what I wanted to do next, but I knew I needed a change. So how many of us can relate to an inflection point or two like that at some point in our lives? Around that time, she was also pregnant with her first baby. So Lisa told me, I had my moment of really believing in myself. It wasn't the college degrees, it wasn't the job titles, it was in giving birth. What an empowering experience. And I thought to myself, I wish so many other people could have a moment like that moment of truly believing in oneself. I really wanted to help other people feel that strong sense of empowerment. Lisa was beginning to figure out her can't not do. So today, she is the director of Year Up. Year Up is a nonprofit that provides at-risk young adults with skills and support to empower them to reach their potential. through professional careers and education. About 85% of Year Up program graduates are in a full-time career or college within 4 months of leaving their year-long program. Lisa is unquestionably an optimist about young adults. We continued the conversation that morning, and one of the things I wondered was, were there any moments for Lisa where she felt like, this is just so hard, I want to be done with this? It took her about 2 seconds to give me 5 stories. I'll share one of them. She told me about one of her students. He was homeless because his family had kicked him out of their house. And a series of mental health problems in his life quickly spiraled downward on him. So Lisa told me there were days when he would walk into my office tired, lost, terrified, in tears. I wanted to take him home with me. Doing this work challenges me. It challenges my own boundaries, my sense of identity, my capacity to love. I've had to grow up. This has been my own year up. I think within that story, there's an awful lot that talks about who Lisa is at her core. Now she says today, people ask her, are you happy? She said to me, I have to stop and think for a minute. See, I'm not doing this to be happy. I completely believe in what I'm doing and who I am, and that is far more fulfilling to me than am I happy. It's not that I'm unhappy, it's just that greater sense of purpose that I know I'm doing what I should be doing. And that's where Lisa is today. So the very last thing that we talked about that morning as she was sort of packing up her briefcase to get her stuff and go off and pick up her now 8-year-old Benjamin from school, she said to me, unprompted, and I quote, it's not that I can do this work, Shu. It's that I can't not. It's not that I can. It's that I can't not. Lisa truly knows what her can't not do is today. All right. Lisa went all in. So before you roll your eyes and say, crap, I can't do that, I want you to know that there are just as many stories of people whose pathways are about carving out a slice of their life, not the whole pie. Like Carrie McClanahan in Portland, like Dwight Frent, my friend in Seattle. Though both of those two wrestled with that question just as surely as Lisa did. But know that there are different pathways that people can take to help change the world once they've figured out their can't not do. So, Carrie's can't not do is every child being fully ready to learn when they get to kindergarten. Today, over 1/3 of kids show up 2 years behind developmentally that very first day of kindergarten. So what Carrie does is she contributes her strategic and marketing expertise, and she has for years. But what's way more powerful is about how Carrie thinks about her work. I remember 2 things I asked her. I said, do you really believe that this goal of every child having an equal chance to learn is possible? She said it's impossible. And I won't stop until we do. Then I said, do you really think that you will stick with this for the long term? And she said, I couldn't imagine not. Could not imagine not. There's that sort of sticky double negative again. So Dwight's can't not do is ending hunger. That's all. And believe me, he believes it. Today there are still about 800 million people around the world, 1 in 8, that suffer from chronic starvation or hunger to this day. So Dwight has given a couple hours a week of his time for about 37 years to ending hunger. Not much, he said. If you add that up, that's the equivalent of about 2 years of a full-time job. But again, what's so powerful is how he thinks about his work. He said, my work is not about helping starving people. It's about working with them to end hunger. That is such a powerful orientation to how he thinks about his can't not do. Both Carrie and Dwight have much more of a backstory, as you can imagine. If you want to know more sort of about either Carrie or Dwight's journeys, please ask me. I'm glad to share it with you. You know, what I've actually done is I've heard hundreds of stories, backstories, and journeys from people, not over just the last year, but over the last 16 years. And what their stories tell me is that there are a few core, common, vital traits of can't not do people. There's a few critical questions that they have answered for their lives and that you can answer for your life. All three of these show up in Lisa's journey. So the first one, what are you a determined optimist about? Let me come back to that in just a minute. Another thing that's common about these can't-do people is they know who they are at their core, and they know how that translates into their can't-not-do. What do they value? What are their roots? What are the most important experiences they've had that affect them in their life? And they most certainly know what are the hard things in life that they are willing to go through for that one thing. You know, it's funny. We love to glorify the entrepreneur that like succeeded because they went through hell, because that's when they learn what they're made of, right? So why is it different in social change and philanthropy? So I would ask you, what are you willing to feel pain for that you will keep going for? What's the mess that you're willing to muddle through and to keep going for? In fact, those three traits, those three questions, they give us a roadmap. It's an equation that basically says, how can you unlock your potential to help the world? So if you actually remember nothing else that I say this morning, that's it. That's the one thing. What are you a determined optimist about? Who are you at your core? What are you willing to go through hard places for? That will get you to your can't not do. There's unquestionably more that we could talk about every one of those three. I know that. But let me just take one of them. Let me take that first one. What are you a determined optimist about? And just dig into it for a few minutes. So what does that mean to someone like Carrie or Dwight or Lisa? What does it mean to be a determined optimist for one of you? What kind of optimism is that? So it's a few things. So one thing is, you know, blind hope and sort of wishful thinking are dangerous. The kind of optimism I'm talking about here is grounded in reality and what you can control and what you cannot control. Think about Lisa and her work with those young adults. That sort of authentic, genuine optimism, it breeds more optimism. Like attracts like. You are vital, but you cannot do this alone. You need to be contagious. When Dwight does his work on ending hunger, he is infectious. Whatever led to believing that a problem couldn't be solved in the past has nothing to do with what can happen in the future. Think about Carrie and her belief about every child having an equal chance to learn. And these determined optimists, they have this assumptive attitude. They have this fundamental positivity and hopefulness that just cannot be deterred. They look at a complex social problem and they see a puzzle to be solved, not a hopeless situation. All three of them think that way. So, Angela Duckworth is a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. And what she studies is human intangibles and how they predict professional and academic success. Her latest work is centered on, and she wrote a book about the notion of grit. So based on years of research, she explained grit is the disposition to pursue very long-term goals with passion and with perseverance. Grit is stamina, it's determination. It's picking one thing and sticking with it and working hard at it. So, for example, when she studied high school graduation rates, grit mattered more than test scores. It mattered more than family income. It mattered more than whether they felt safe in the school. Grit mattered more than anything else. Determination plus optimism equals grit. They grow from the same seed. I would submit to you that determination without optimism leads to sort of a joyless act. It can drag you down. It can ultimately defeat your spirit. Optimism without determination leads you to be unrealistic. It leads you to sort of give up when things get hard and you really, really need to dig in. It's determination. It's optimism. It's both. The moment one commits oneself, providence moves too. Whatever you can do or dream you can do, begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. So pick that one thing that you are a determined optimist about. Begin it. It has genius, power, and magic in it. Can't not do people know what they are determined optimists about? Our world's social challenges, they are not getting easier. So on the one hand, we have the complexity of these problems and the speed at which they're changing in this world. And on the other hand, we have our collective know-how and all these human and financial resources we bring to bear. And there has never been a time where the potential to tip that balance towards greater positive or negative change has ever been higher. If you think about the last generation, teen pregnancy and violent crime, they've declined almost in half. At the same time, the rates of childhood obesity have doubled. Can't not do people sit at that fulcrum, right at that middle point, right? You are the fulcrum. Can you see that? Like, can I make my point enough? That middle point right there. That's where all of us stand, at the fulcrum of that question. Every one of us can be a lever to tip that balance. Every one of us. Don't ask what the world needs from you. Ask what makes you come alive. So for me, it's time to come alive. What is your can't not do? You would not be here if you did not already care deeply about that question. To me, it is the fundamental question. What I want you to know is that it is not a black hole. It's not a mystical experience. It's right there for you to seize. We just talked about pathways. There's an equation. It's not easy. You're going to have to give up your fears and your insecurities. But helping to change the world does not require superhuman abilities. It doesn't require special destiny. Really what it requires is a personal drive to make a difference, the willingness to reflect deeply on a few key questions, and to turn those answers into action. Drive, reflection, action. If that sounds simple, it's not. If it sounds attainable, it is. And if it sounds universal, it truly is. So when I was in China in June this year, I asked Jia Xu at SVP China, I wondered, does can't not do even translate to Chinese? She said, yes, it does. So it translates as a motivation at your core to want to devote to or be responsible for something. It conveys a stronger passion than must do. A stronger passion than must do. I love that. My friend Dwight has this beautiful expression that he's used to sort of guide him in his 37 years of work towards the end of hunger. For him, it's about surrendering to the intention that life is wanting to use him for. Surrendering to the intention that his life wants to use him for. That is, for me, that is so profound. Just think about that. What that means is that there is a cause in your community, in your world, that is wanting to use your life. So if each of us can find that one thing that we can surrender ourselves to, that one thing that we can't not do, each of us can be a powerful lever to tip the balance towards a better world. Thank you for listening this morning. Great to be here.